They don't want to make a deal for peace with Israel if they're exposed to Iranian threats and the threats of other radical and apocalyptic Islamists in the region, if the United States is going to blow them off, not sell them weapons, and treat them like a pariah state. This is a serious problem. Why did Saudi Arabia just normalize relations, not with Israel, but with Iran? Why did they let China broker the deal? And what's the effect that that's going to have on the possibility of peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia? Hi, I'm Joel Rosenberg in Jerusalem for the Rosenberg Report. This is a YouTube exclusive, and I want to get into this issue because I'm getting asked questions by people in the media, by people in the United States and around the world, texting me, emailing me, shooting me notes on Twitter. What just happened here? Why did the Saudis go towards Iran? Let me try to break this down. First, let me say that I'm going to front load this part. I'm not convinced that this is negative for Israel. It could be, but I'm not convinced of that yet. I think the jury's still out on that. I'm going to get back to that in a moment, but I just wanted to tell you that up front. I still believe that the Saudis want to make peace with Israel. They want to normalize with the state of Israel. And I believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu is the person who could make this happen. But let me get into that in a moment. First, what actually happened? Well, about a week ago, we heard the news that the Saudis had normalized relations with Iran. What does that mean? Well, it means that these two countries were at loggerheads. They were, when I was in Saudi Arabia, my last time, right before COVID, this was in 2019, just as we were leaving the country, the Iranian regime sent armed drones from Iran into Saudi Arabia to attack Saudi Arabia's largest oil refineries, part of the Aramco company, one of the most successful oil companies in the world, and I think the first, one of the first, based in Saudi Arabia. It's the American Saudi oil company. And this was devastating. Now, at the time, the Saudis were not only furious and terrified, I think it's fair to say, the people, that the Iranians might be preparing to do more damage, more attacks on Saudi Arabia. But the Saudi leadership also got quite frustrated with the Trump administration. Why? Because they wanted President Trump to retaliate against Iran sort of on the Saudis' behalf because it's not just the Saudis that faced Iranian aggression, right? The terrorism that the Iranian regime has been fomenting throughout the region against Israel, against the Arab allies, against ships that are moving through the Straits of Hormuz in what's known as the Arabian Gulf if you're an Arab, or the Persian Gulf if you're an Iranian. There have been tankers and other container ships and things hijacked by Iranian terrorists and Iranian-backed terrorists. There have been Iranian-backed terror groups like the Houthis in Yemen that have been firing ballistic missiles at the United Arab Emirates, and even more so at Saudi Arabia. So the Iranian terror regime, the terrorists of Tehran, the terror masters of Tehran, have been a serious problem, not just to the Saudis, but to Israel, to the Americans, to everybody in the region, okay? Every peace-loving person in the region. So the Saudis wanted the Trump administration to retaliate, to send a strong message, hey, knock it off. At first, the Trump team considered it, but President Trump called off any type of strikes. And so it looked for a few months like the U.S. government, the Trump administration, which had been good on the Iran issue, which had torn up the Iran nuclear deal, which had imposed the maximum pressure campaign on Tehran, all these draconian economic sanctions on the Iranian regime to try to pressure the Iranian government to come, to its knees, so that it would say, okay, we're going to give up our nuclear weapons ambitions. We're going to let inspectors come and look at all of our nuclear sites. We're going to, export and get rid of all of our enriched uranium, and we're going to just be a peaceful country. We're done. That's what the hope was, and the sanctions were having a huge effect. So, in many ways, the Trump administration was doing a great job on dealing with Iran. But the Saudis were frustrated. genuinely frustrated. And they had a good relationship with President Trump. President Trump had come to Saudi Arabia, right, to the kingdom, on his first trip abroad as becoming President of the United States, right? He went to Saudi Arabia first, and not just met with the Saudi leadership, he met with the leaders of more than 50 Arab and Muslim countries that all came for a summit in Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia. That's where Trump went first on his first foreign trip as president, and then right from Saudi Arabia here to Israel to show that Trump loves Israel. The United States is close to Israel, and we're trying to build an alliance between Israel and the Arab world for good, for economic reasons, for tourism, for trade, for technology, but also for security against threats like the Iranian regime. So that was all very positive. And the Saudi senior leadership's relationship with President Trump and his senior team, with Mike Pompeo as Secretary of State, with Vice President Mike Pence, with Jared Kushner, the head of the Middle East peacemaking strategic team within the White House. All those relationships were positive, but the Saudis were frustrated that the Trump team seemed not to take seriously enough, in their minds, retaliating against Iran. But then the Trump administration surprised everybody by doing what? By firing a missile from a drone at Iran's top terror strategist, Qasem Soleimani. That happened in December of 2020, right around then. And that news did a lot of good, because taking out Iran's top terror master sort of helped a lot of people in the region think, okay, the Trump team is taking this seriously. But then what happened? Well, Trump was no longer the president. Joe Biden had become the president. And what was Biden's main message about the Saudis? That they were horrible people. It's a horrible country. That he was going to make them a pariah state because they're just horrible. They make all kinds of horrible decisions. And Biden was calling the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, also known as MBS, he was calling him a murderer. Now, remember, Saudi Arabia is an ally. I'm not saying that the Saudis have done everything right. Read my book, Enemies and Allies, nonfiction book, came out in the fall of 2021. Enemies and Allies. I give the good, the bad, and the ugly about the Saudis. I've met with the Crown Prince twice. I deal with the Jamal Khashoggi murder. I deal with a lot of the issues going on inside Saudi Arabia. The fact that there's not a single church allowed to be built and operated inside Saudi Arabia. But there's also a lot of good things happening. The Crown Prince is turning the ship of state in Saudi Arabia to a much more positive direction. And I lay out both fairly and in detail in Enemies and Allies. But Biden sees none of the positive. He is focused 100% on the negative and has decided to pull missile batteries, U.S. missile defense batteries, out of Saudi Arabia to prevent Saudi Arabia from buying certain weapon systems from the United States, and a whole series of other things, including publicly, denouncing and blasting MBS as a murderer and the Saudi kingdom as a pariah state. That has not gone over well, as you can imagine, in Saudi Arabia. What's strange about it is that Biden is simultaneously has been doing everything he can to be friendly to the Iranian regime, right? Offering the Iranian regime a way back into the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, which was the Iran nuclear deal, in which President Obama and then Vice President Biden gave the Iranian regime roughly $150 billion in order to, be part of this nuclear deal, which didn't stop Iran from moving towards nuclear weapons, and in fact, as Prime Minister Netanyahu here says, paved the way, actually made it even easier over time for the Iranian regime to get to nuclear weapons that could annihilate, obliterate Israel and our Arab allies and devastate the United States once Iran finishes building long-range intercontinental ballistic missiles. So just think about this for a moment. You've got Biden being more friendly to the terror masters in Tehran than to our allies in Saudi Arabia. Like, what's wrong with that picture? I've been writing about that on All Israel News, All Arab News. I wrote about it in enemies and allies. It's a problem. And with that problem comes the growing anxiety inside the Saudi government. They feel very much alone in the world, up against the Iranian regime. Now, again, if you read Enemies and Allies, you're going to see that I quote MBS on how he regards the leadership of Iran. We asked him, the team of us asked him, how do you regard the supreme leader of Iran? And MBS said on the record, he is the new Hitler. So the leader of Saudi Arabia said that the leader of Iran was the new Hitler. You know, dangerous, trying to build nuclear weapons, fomenting terrorism, a threat to killing potentially millions of people if they get nuclear weapons, to be able to create the type of genocide that Hitler created in Europe in the 1940s, okay? That's how that's how the Saudi regime sees the Iranian regime. So we go back to that central question. Why then are the Saudis creating a rapprochement, a normalization with Iran? Now, it doesn't mean they're best of friends. What it means is the more the Saudis feel isolated in the world, the more that the Saudis feel that Biden does not have their back, that Biden is not treating them like an American ally that can be trusted up against the Iranian regime, the more the Saudis feel like they're a player in a neighborhood with a very serious threat, and that maybe it's better to talk to that and try to negotiate and try to find a way to dial down tensions with Iran, because the American superpower is not there. It's showing more interest in Iran than in Saudi. It's blasting the Saudis as horrible people with horrible leaders. It's withdrawing American military assistance to Saudi Arabia as they face a nuclear-armed Iran potentially soon, just as we're facing here in Israel. And this is freaking the Saudis out. And so my short answer to summarize all that is, I believe the Saudis are hedging their bets as they watch Biden blast them, the Saudis, and withdraw from Saudi Arabia, and withdraw increasingly from the region and pay less and less attention to the events here in the region, and seem mostly unconcerned with Iran. Oh, there's some rhetoric out of the White House that, oh yeah, they're a problem. But we don't see any action, serious, decisive action about the Biden administration having any plan to neutralize the Iranian nuclear threat or the Iranian terror regime. That's a problem. It's a problem for Israel. It's a problem for the Gulf states. It's a problem for Saudi Arabia. It's a problem for everybody in this region. And Biden is failing big time, okay? That's why I believe the Saudis are doing this. Now, there's a couple last elements. Why did the Chinese come in and help be the negotiators, the brokers of this relationship? The Chinese are looking to become a global empire. They want to have global, not regional, not just regional. They want to be a global power, okay? They have nuclear weapons. They have a massive army. They have enormous amounts of money. And they don't want to just dominate the Pacific. They want to become a global power. And if America is retreating under the Biden administration in the Middle East, the Chinese are moving in, trying to become everybody's best friend, and they want to be the power players. The Russians want to do that too, but now the Chinese have moved in, and the Saudis sell a lot of oil to China. So if America is going to abandon them, if America is going to abandon the Saudis are going to move towards their number one customer, okay? This is the dynamic. Now, last point. Does this affect the possibility of a Israeli rapprochement or normalization with the Saudis? Are the Saudis done with that? No, I don't believe that. Now, it could be the case, but I don't believe that right now. I know from talking to multiple sources who have spent time with the senior leadership in Saudi Arabia that the Saudi leadership wants to make peace with Israel. They want to normalize with Israel. I wrote an article on All Israel News a few months ago, in January, I believe it was, in which I interviewed a former senior White House official, on the record, you can see his name. He was a former chief national security advisor to Dick Cheney, the vice president. He had just brought a group late last year to Saudi Arabia to meet with all the top leadership, including MBS. And this gentleman told me on the record that the Saudis told him that they are ready to make peace with Israel. They're ready to normalize with Israel, but they won't do it until somebody helps them normalize relations with Joe Biden. They don't want to make a deal for peace with Israel if they're exposed to Iranian threats and the threats of other radical and apocalyptic Islamists in the region, if the United States is going to blow them off, not sell them weapons, and treat them like a pariah state. This is a serious problem. And it's a problem coming primarily from the Biden White House. Keep praying for peace in the region. Keep praying for the peace of this city, the city I live in, the city of Jerusalem, and for our whole country and our whole region. Pray that God will move in the hearts of the Israeli and Saudi leaders to make that peace, but pray that either the Biden team changes course and starts to understand who are our allies and who are our enemies, or that the Biden team is removed and somebody better comes to power in the United States. I'm Joel Rosenberg with a YouTube exclusive for the Rosenberg Report.